Today we're going to talk a little bit about the new Upscaling tab. This release has a new tab in it. It's called the Upscaling tab. And what we've done is we've made it super easy to use this kind of standard creative technique that has been applied a lot by people in workflows, but ultimately makes this super easy to use in a tab format. And we've kind of like streamlined it so that you don't have to learn nodes. You don't have to get like super into the technical weeds. You can just use the tool. So we've got a piece of art that we've created. We've generated the work. There's two ways we can kind of look at what we've done and kind of getting better details out of it. We can take this and we can go in paint on it. And that's certainly what I would probably normally do first. But let's talk about the upscaling process itself and kind of what it is going to do. So I'm going to take the prompt that I've got. And I might want to fiddle with this before I get started, but I'm just going to kind of give you a little bit of an intro to the Upscaling tab. The Upscaling tab's got a new section called Upscale. With the Upscale tab and with this release, you can now use any upscaling model that is supported by the system. And so that means previously we had just ESR GAN models, like the base models, and they were kind of locked in and preloaded with the system. Now you can upload custom upscaling models. There's a couple links that we've provided in the release notes, which are good places to find these. But these are effectively ML models that have been trained and specialized at going through and actually taking a smaller image and upscaling those details. Now, by default, those models can do pretty well at getting kind of like clarity and making sure that you don't get like the JPEG artifact type look when you resize. But where this upscaling tab and this upscaling workflow really shines is once that upscale model has done its job of creating the larger base image, Invoke is actually going to go through and break that image down into tiles. And it is going to use a combination of control and the denoising process to add more details in and kind of really give it that look like it was actually taken at this size or created at this size. It's going to go in and kind of do that creative imagination that we know and love with these types of tools. The sliders that we've got here are going to control the kind of the elements that we're looking at, right? So we've got two sliders here underneath the advanced options. By default, these will be set at 0. Creativity is going to kind of similar to how you'd use it for denoising strength. The higher creativity is going to allow more of the denoising process at risk of making it very different than your original image. I would say if you guys are running into any types of connection issues, definitely would blame me. I've been fighting with my, it's not the GPU and it's not the ISP. It is the router. I think we're like starting to get some like IP address conflicts at the house or something like that. It's a little bit of an issue that we're sorting out. But if we look at this, I think one thing that is really interesting with this is we have some creative flexibility. We can say, give me a faithful upscale, or we can say, I want to kind of do a little bit of a style transfer. I want to mix it up a little bit. As it's going through this tiling process and breaking down the image, the prompt that we use, we're going to want that to be relatively style focused rather than subject. And the reason why is, especially if you get on larger tiles, what's going to end up happening is if our creativity slider is extremely high, we're going to see kind of like individual tiles get transformed by our prompt, right? So it's going to be going in and trying to find a dark space night in the top left tile and the top right tile and the bottom right tile. Like it's going to go in and try to like figure out, similar to if you're doing Inpainting or something and had a very high denoising strength, it's going to try to find those details. So if you turn creativity way up, you likely are also going to need to turn structure up. And structure is controlling a tile control net. Now, it's not just a raw tile control net. It's actually a multi-phase tile control net. So it starts very high on structure and then kind of tapers off towards the end. But you're going to want to use higher structure if you want it to look more like your original image and you're still using kind of creativity to get some of those details. And we've got some like fun in the background. Hopefully you guys aren't getting too much extra noise. If we take a model that we've got selected and we use a specialized model on a different style, we're actually going to be able to do some of that style transfer in this upscale. This is where you can get into some really interesting exploration with the new upscaler. The thing I will recommend is if you're doing like photorealism and trying to upscale, you're going to want to make sure that you pick the right model for that. But you're also probably going to want to use maybe some detail LoRa's, things that are focused on kind of like getting in close and adding in a lot of detail, because that's effectively what you're going to be doing with the tiled upscale process. The other thing that I'll call out is the scheduler has a significant impact on this process. What I've found in my testing is KDPM2. It's not everyone's favorite scheduler, but for some reason, I've landed on this one as like my personal preference for getting really, really good details out of the upscaling process. I would recommend experimenting and kind of figuring out different schedulers probably work better for different styles. But in my experience, KDPM2 is what I like to use. So let's just give it a try. Let's see what happens. I'm going to maybe take out our subject here just so that we can kind of like see what this looks like. The last thing I'll call out is the upscale model that you use may generate an image in that node or that model that is larger than the in scale that we land with. We're looking at right now at a 4x upscale and a 2x scale setting. What that's going to end up doing is it's going to upscale using the upscale model to 4x, but then it's going to downscale that to 2x before running the denoising process. I actually find that using a 4x model and downscaling is really, really good for additional detail. It helps kind of preserve a lot of the character of the image. So that's what I typically do is I'll use a 4x upscale model and then use the scale of 2x and maybe do that repeatedly if I want to get to a larger image. But you certainly can, if you want to, use larger scale values. Just typically want to kind of like think about that. If you go above what is set for the upscale model, we will automatically run the upscale model again. So if you use 8x and you've got a 4x model or a 2x model, it will rerun the upscale model again, so that it's not just like doing a linear upsize, it will rerun it automatically. So there's a little bit of like quality of life features baked into that, but we'll keep it at 2 because we want to kind of get the raw essence here. Now I'm just going to do 0 and 0. We'll see what we get, and we'll kind of compare the aesthetics of this image, kind of get into the image generation process. I think one thing that I'll call out is your objectives might be to have this kind of drive composition, but ultimately get a lot of extra details out of it. Similar to almost as if you went in and did an inpainting on various pieces. If that's your goal, you're going to want to bring creativity up a little bit. If your goal is, I want a faithful representation of this, you'll probably play at a 0 setting or lower. You're going to kind of like basically try to fix some of the smaller details and artifacts that come from the upscaling process, but not really have anything new added. And it's going to really depend on what your goals are and what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do style transfer, you certainly need to have the creativity up a little bit higher. What we're looking at with this preview image, obviously it's going a little bit slower. It's generating each tile and then compositing that in each preview step. So this is actually generating multiple copies of an image. That's taking the time of like 4 image generations. So if we compare the details here, this is a 0 and a 0. Obviously this is a scaled down version. If we were to blow this up, I think we would see even more. But you can see that there's been a lot of details added. The skull here in the middle of the belt has kind of got a lot of extra like skull detail. But overall, the structure is very similar. There's a lot of like little touches in the background, which are really nice. Just to get like the full effects of the detail, I'm going to open this up in a new tab and we can kind of zoom in and compare this. So we can see that there's still some weirdness here in the chest. That's because we didn't fix that pre-upscale. What typically would go in and fix some of these smaller details with Inpainting. But overall, this added a lot of nice texture and detail to this that you'd lose if you didn't have this in an upscale. So this is the actual, like, this is the full size image that we upscaled from, and this is kind of where we're at with the upscale. Now what I want to do is I want to kind of maybe explore making this a little bit different. So I'm going to bump up the creativity to maybe a 5. And I'm going to change the prompt here to something like cinematic, film still, cinematography, 80 millimeter lens, chiaroscuro, highlights, and what do we have? What else do we want? Futuristic space thriller. And I'm going to turn the creativity up to 6. We'll run through the same process. So now it's using a different prompt, right? So it's kind of like in the denoising process, it's looking for different characteristics. It's trying to create something using the noise, and it's still got structure from the original image, but it's got some freedom here to really kind of reimagine this. We'll see if we gave it too much freedom, if there's anything like particularly different. But it's going through and it's kind of applying this new style as it's reimagining or upscaling the image. And I think what we should see is this is going to give it a nice nudge style-wise, while still creating a lot of the core structural consistency, color consistency from our original image. So it's not creating something entirely new. We're kind of like passing over it with a new, it's almost like a filter, right? A filter that is reimagining it using this like new style. Seeing some questions come in. Ooh, this sounds, oh, actually, no, we got multiple questions. Can I install custom upscale models like 4X Ultra Sharp? Yes, you can. You just go to the model manager and import any of those models. This sounds like you can take someone's photo and style transfer them to anime. I'm installing the release candidate and can't wait to try it out. You could, yes. I think that you'll still want to kind of play around and see what the right way to approach that might be. But this is a really good way of kind of reimagining using a lot of structural stuff. Checking my understanding, creativity goes up, many new details, high denoising, maybe details not linked to the source. Creativity goes down, light refinement, low denoising, details not too far from source. That's probably a pretty good interpretation. So let's look at this versus our original image. You can see that our creativity has, says stream is still running on my side. All good for you all? Okay, cool. We brought up the creativity, and we can see that we've got some really cool shading coming in from like trying to push this more towards a cinematic film still. It's not completely gone away from our original painting source, right? It still has a lot of certain elements of our image, but this is a lot closer to this more like cinematic style, and it's kind of shoved it in that direction because of the creativity that we've applied. If we brought this down structure wise, it would give it a lot more freedom to reimagine this. It might get a little crazy. But yeah, I think these things work hand in hand, and you're going to kind of want to play around with it depending on your creative goals. But let's take a look at this closer up, and we can kind of see what this has done versus certainly our original image. But if we look at this compared to our original default upscale, we can see that there are definitely there's a lot more depth on this visor. This kind of like futuristic sci-fi visor is a lot clearer. On the old upscale, the one was kind of faithful to that original generation. There were a lot of details that were kind of off in the original generation that we didn't fix. We didn't go in and in-paint those or fix those in any way. And so those carried up to the upscale. However, with our kind of more free creative upscale, it actually added a lot of new elements and details to this. What I really love is the details on this belt. That skull is really cool. And I like the shading on it. It just looks a lot more like coherent even though this upscale added a lot of detail from our original, because the original had like a lot of botched stuff in it, this is just a lot cleaner and looks like more consistent. So you can see the background looks a lot more realistic. And in this one, it's definitely painterly. You've got this kind of like brush stroke vibe. In this, it looks like the background of a movie still, right? It's like a little bit more of a blurred, realistic look. And I think that this is, it's really interesting, right? It's a really interesting tool. So any questions on this piece? I will call out a couple of weird things that I'll note. There's definitely some like planets in this tile here. And I think that came from like the science fiction background, is like it's trying to figure out how this is in space. And if we're looking at like structurally how this image was generated, there's 4-ish tiles. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4 different SDXL images. And this tile, as it was generating it, it kind of interpreted that as like, how do I make that like fit the prompt? And that's where it got a little bit more of that like planet piece. And someone said, I'm sure there's a little tiny whale instead of a planet in another. If we put like an underwater prompt, I imagine, yeah, that would definitely probably imagine some whales there. So you can run this again. It would take longer. We're going to keep it at 2x. I don't want everybody waiting for eons. But you can upscale it again and kind of get some of those details. Now, the thing that I'll call out is if we take this to the canvas, you're gonna need to be mindful that you're working on a larger image. And so you will need to like focus the bounding box on smaller regions. If we were to take this to the canvas, for example, and affix some of these details, what I would probably do is like focus in on some areas. You'll see that even with this bounding box here, the size of this region of the image is 800 by 896. So it's like you have to bring this down if you're using SDXL to really get in and work on some of these details. To fix for that, we've kind of played around with this in the past. What I think is a really interesting technique here is using tile control net. So we'll pull this down to tile. Taking the tile, and this is the same technique that we used to get the upscale, but this is really useful for inpainting as well. I'll bring this weight down to about 0.5 and an instep of about 75%. What that's going to do is it's going to force the denoising process to kind of adhere to this roughly. It's kind of the same thing that we're doing with the upscaling creativity and structure sliders. But I can kind of come in and inpaint some of these details. So we'll say like a space night, dark space night, skull, chest, emblem, cinematic film still. And so I'll come in and I'll kind of detail this region out, and I'm going to let it reimagine that area. Now, because we're focusing on one area, we've got a tile control net. It shouldn't deviate too far from our current structure, but it will allow us to kind of come in and push it around. In inpainting, if you're using this type of technique, denoising strength is effectively your creativity slider, and your tile control net settings are your structural slider. So this is kind of where we get a little bit more freedom. Now, we got some good details on the chest plate. It kind of turned those into like wings, but the skull is kind of still a little bit rough because the tile control net is giving it too much structural control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away my mask, and I'm just going to regenerate this kind of like skull piece. Because we don't have the tile control net, it's kind of really just reimagining and doing the re-inpainting piece. So we should be able to get a little bit more detail on what we're actually looking for here. It's a little bit weird though. So maybe what I'll do is I turn our tile back on. I'll turn the strength down and have that finish a little bit earlier. And then we'll try to kind of like map the same perspective and structure. So someone's asking a couple questions here. Which tile control net do you use for SDXL? There are several by different people. I use Zinser's tile control net. I've found that his control nets are really, really very good. We can make sure to include links to those, but I believe that they are now also set, if you download the latest release, as starter models. So you should have that by default if you download the starter models, or if you are using the hosted product, you just have that as a tile control net by default. So that's a little bit better. Maybe we'll take another tile pass and just regenerate this skull here. We could fiddle with that skull all day, I'm sure, to get perfect, but we're just kind of going through some techniques here. So we'll get off the canvas here momentarily and get back to upscaling, and we'll take a couple of different stylistic detours and talk about different ways you can use it. I don't love that skull, but it's okay. We'll move on. So we'll go back to our upscaling tab, and we're going to maybe focus on a more photorealistic image. Let's try this car. I'm going to take the prompt that I've got here, and this is just a relatively like long prompt that gave us this cool style. I think I'm going to give it a little bit of creativity and turn the structure down a little bit, and we'll give a shot at upscaling this image. Let's see what we like here. Again, I've chosen the KDPM scheduler primarily for this type of image. What I found is that KDPM 2 just produces better photorealistic content. It has the balance between kind of depth and texture without adding too many artifacts or weird kind of looking patterns in the image. It's just a really good standby. I'm sure that there are other schedulers. I'm excited to see what the community comes up with and playing around with this, but this is just from my initial testing and kind of, you know how this space is if you fall into a pattern or a favorite, you just, for whatever reason, keep using it, even if there are other things that could do the same thing. So this is just where I've landed for now for my upscaling scheduler. Now, a couple people called out requirements. We will find that using this process shouldn't be too much more memory intensive than just using the base model and a control net, right? You have to have enough for the base model and a control net. If you can't get SDXL to run, this works just as well with SD 1.5. The settings are a little bit different for SD 1.5. We can kind of talk about those. Typically what you'll find is SD 1.5 is just a little bit more creative, and so you typically need to bring that creativity slider down. But if we take a look at some of the details here, it's a much sharper image. We'll open this up and take a look versus our original. So upscaled, maybe some things I don't really love over here artifacts wise that came in from the upscaler. This looks a little bit like rougher than I'd like, but overall a lot of good details. It's a lot crisper. Everything feels pretty sharp, and a lot of it's maintained, right? So I brought up the creativity a little bit so that I could kind of like create some of these effects, but did a pretty good job of taking our image and upscaling it, and got a lot of the shininess out of this that we were hoping for. Some things that I would obviously tweak if I wanted to. I'd kind of go in and do some work on the building up here just to get that edge a little bit more blurred probably. But overall, I'm pretty happy with this upscale. Let's try this guy, because I think this is where we're going to see some real fun stuff with some of these details. I'm going to turn the creativity slider up to 6, and then I'm going to I'll keep the structure at like 0. We don't want to get too crazy here. Yeah, we'll generate this guy. Let's see what we got. Someone said, wow. Someone said, sweet. Those are cool. You could composite the two images together and only bring in the things you like with a mask or something. Yeah, you could. The one thing to note, though, is if you're compositing this image with this image, you're going to find that this doesn't have as much detail. It's effectively half the size, right? as this image. So you'd want to maybe do a couple of different upscales with higher degrees of creativity on some than the others, and then composite those upscales together. That's probably what I'd say if you're going to take that approach, what you'd want to do. The other thing, though, is like if you're going to do that, that's what the canvas is for. It's kind of an auto compositor. You're able to regenerate parts and pieces and have those auto composited for you on the canvas. And so that's typically what I would do, is to get that very specific degree of control going and edit that on the canvas. But I do think that there's some valid points here on interesting approaches you can take to get the end result you're looking for. This process, someone said the problem with the canvas is that you can't composite after the image is generated. Well, effectively you are compositing. When you do inpainting, it's compositing that new generation on top of the old one. But hear you that you can't get multiple layers and a bunch of different control nets in and regional prompting on the canvas yet. It's coming. But I think right now where I'd say is if you're looking to like get multiple variations and do maybe some like traditional photo bashing and editing, maybe bring multiple upscale images out into Photoshop or something like that. Okay, so upscale versus our original. I'd say there's still some like not realistic details here in our upscale that probably is coming from a little bit too much structure on this from our base image, but it does fix some of the problems that you would probably want to fix in the base image. The eyes are clearer. It may not be perfectly photorealistic because we haven't given it enough creativity or reduced the structure enough, but it is ultimately a much better, clearer image relative to what we had originally. Some of the details are fixed, like the eyes. See if there's any other details. There's a little bit more of like a wood texture in the background. The clothes have, I would say, a much nicer texture. Like the zipper looks good. This looks a little bit cleaner. Overall, I think there's a lot of good details. You probably still want to inpaint this one. If you're upscaling an image that I would say like you want to really push it away from that core style, let's maybe go back to let's try this one, cinematic film still. Right. We'll try another upscale here. We're gonna loosen the structure a bit. Risky. We'll up the creativity a little bit more, and rather than using the same prompt that generated the initial image, we're just shoving it directly into this kind of like, we probably should take photo out of our negative, would probably help. Photography, professional photography, cinematic film still, blah, 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 blah. Okay, we're gonna try this one. And this is our same base image. We're just kind of upscaling using a different technique, a little bit more creativity, a different prompt. We're going to kind of push it out of that same space, the creative space that generated our original image. So again, this kind of goes back to, if you're trying to get a different style, if you're trying to get more details, try playing around with prompts that would push it towards those details that you want. Someone's asking the question, additional upscales default to the original image. Whatever image you put in here is going to stay there until you change it. So if you wanted to loop and upscale again, you would take your output and drag that into the upscale box, and that would allow you to upscale a second time. But if you're just going in and playing around with settings, leave the upscale the same, and what it's going to do is just give you another shot, right? You're kind of doing the same thing, but trying something else. Things that I haven't shown, but you can use, LoRa's work with this. So if you want to add any number of LoRa's, that's another way of kind of shoving away from a certain style. If you want to kind of get out of the box, the creative box, if you will. You can change your models. You can add embeddings, and do a whole host of like those types of techniques that would allow you to really play around with this. So we're almost done with this one, which is going to be, I think, a lot more photorealistic than our original upscale, because we've given more creativity and we've pushed it towards a specific style. I'm optimistic. Yeah, it's still better. We'd probably still need more creativity, but probably debatable whether we actually like that. It actually looks a little bit more 3D, in my opinion. I'm very tempted to just do this again and really jack up the creativity. Do we want to do that? Do we want to try a new image, or do we want to want to get this to where let's do it. Let's get to where we want to go. I want this to be more photorealistic. I'm going to take the creativity all the way to, no, it doesn't go to 11. Okay, we're going to go to 10. I tried. We're taking it all the way up. Let's see what happens. Could be good. May not get there, but we'll try. I think the one downside, obviously, here is creative experimentation is a little bit slower when you're doing this at an upscaled, type size. This same type of creative style transfer you can do at a normal size. So you don't have to upscale to get this type of style transfer. What the upscale is going to do is going to apply that with a lot more detail. So you're going to get a lot more of the nuance and the kind of like subtleties in that process. It's almost like a combination of doing a style transfer plus doing that with like inpainting in different regions. I'll show you how you can replicate this type of style transfer at a normal resolution with just normal control layers. But you know, this is part of the fun of the upscale, is that you do get this kind of like larger version with a lot more richness and detail. One thing that I'll call out of this process is behind the scenes, this is using what's known as MultiDiffusion and Tiled Denoising. And what that means is we have created a tile map, which breaks this down into chunks. We've overlapped those using the gradient denoising effect, so that there's a little bit more gradient denoising with the next tile. And so that's how we're able to keep some of the structural consistency in the tiles without having seams. This is like relatively seamless versus if you were just doing raw tiles and trying to compose those after the fact. We're actually blending those together and kind of doing the denoising over each other, which is really cool. I think this is still going to have a little bit of that plasticky look, but it's okay. You know, wondering if our prompt is at fault here. It's not terrible. The eyes are a little bit worse. I just like this original upscale better. Maybe the structure is what's getting me that. But I'll show you the quick example of how we can play around with this in the control layers. I'll take this as an initial image, take a tile control net, and use that same image. We'll start at maybe 0.5 and end 65% of the way through. And we'll run this and see what we get. So this is a quicker way of experimenting with that same concept of style transfer. It's just a combination of style and denoising. That's going to let you play around with like maybe perfecting the prompt before you waste time on upscaling it. You can kind of like figure out, are you getting what you want out of it? In this case, we very clearly are not getting what we want out of it. It's probably a function of the prompt that we're using. So let's try mixing this prompt up a little bit. So we liked the first image, and then I tried all that like other prompt stuff, and it didn't work out super well. Yeah, this is not really upscaling. This is just reimagining with a 1x size. And so this is a good way to kind of experiment on style transfer and things like that, like what's going to happen when you do it full size before you waste the time for the upscaling process. But this is technically under the hood of how the tile is being recreated. So you can kind of see stylistically what elements we're getting. Maybe detailed HDR, photography. Take photo out of the negative prompt. And maybe let's play around with adding in some detail LoRa's. So these are just some detail LoRa's that will make things more detailed, and we'll try another generation there. And then if we like it, then we'll go through the upscale process, right? Someone's asking, someone said this is really impressive. That's cool. Someone said, could it work similarly to 3D render engines, like dividing the image to be rendered into square tiles and rendering each square individually? That is what it's doing. This is how it's working. It's generating each tile individually. We're presenting it to you in the interface as a single step, but under the hood, it's generating each individual tile and compositing those together. So it is doing that in an individual tile basis and rendering that for you. We're just kind of like showing it to the user in a kind of more elegant preview. I like the details on this, and I think the problems that we would find like this, like the eyes, will be fixed with tiled. So we're going to try these same settings using our same stuff here, our new prompts. We'll keep the man with the mohawk. I don't know. A creative 10, I think that's going to be dangerous. We'll do that with this prompt and do that upscaling now. Someone said, it does not speed it up. It makes it slower, but it takes the normal amount of VRAM. It does make it slower marginally because you're using like a little bit more resources. You're using a control net. It's like it does take more resources rather than just like doing a raw image to image. But it's certainly not going to take the same amount as if you were generating this size image in one go. Someone asked, what is the structure slider effect? The structure slider effect underneath the hood is changing a sliding scale for the tile control net. It's simultaneously making, there's a two-phase tile control net. We can actually break down the workflow under the hood after this image generates. But under the hood, the structure control net is being modified in a two-phase process. There's two tile control nets, and the early step and the last step are both controlled by the structure slider. It basically brings the strength down for both of those, and it changes the end step as well. So it ends earlier on in the process and allows for the tail end of it to have a little bit more freedom. So if you've got a high creativity and a low structure, what you're going to find is that it's going to get kind of crazy. If you max this to creativity 10, -10 structure, it's going to get all over the place. Somebody asked, what are the benefits of this over the tiled upscale workflow? This is a lot easier to manipulate and use. It's got some of the affordances like mixing in LoRa's, doing the kind of stuff that you would expect with the UI, embedding suggestions, all of the kind of like normal interface stuff. But you could build this in the workflows yourself. There's no like significant benefit other than like quality of life. Okay, this guy got a little bit, his lips are a little bit pinker. But I think relative to our original, definitely a little bit more what I was hoping for. Still would probably want to do some inpainting, and there's some perfection here, but this is what you get when you turn creativity up to 10 and structure down, is you get a little bit of stray away from our original concept. But all in all, I think some good details and some things that we would work with. So let's see what happens when we play around with something like this, a little bit more of like a 3D type generation. So I think we got 3D vibe style. Maybe we'll use that 3D vibe LoRa. Bring, I think I like this one better. Third Eye King of Marshmallow Plump. Bring this one up. We'll just do a raw generation here. And then after we generate this one, we'll dive into the workflow piece and kind of bring this up. The tiled upscale workflow, somebody said, I don't believe the tiled upscale workflow used MultiDiffusion. It depends on which tiled upscale workflow you're talking about. There's an old beta workflow that we had, which was broken out into a lot of different nodes. It was kind of hard to use in the workflows, but it was kind of more beta and experimental for tiling. What we ended up doing is in recent release, I think it was actually the most recent release, we consolidated all of that logic into a single node. You don't have the same level of control and like messing with certain things, like changing around how tiling is done and controlling all of that. You don't have to, though, which is the benefit of a singular node. But that node also does multi-diffusion, and that node is the tiled multi-diffusion denoise latence node, I think is the name of it. We'll dive into workflows and kind of break down the workflow momentarily. But that tiled upscale multi-diffusion node is a tiled breakdown of whatever image you put in. If you put in the same size image, you can actually do tiled denoising on a small image. It'll just break it down into whatever tile size you use. We can go through the mechanics of that and kind of how it works. If you're interested in building workflows using it, I know that there's definitely like different levels of skill from very basic to more advanced. Very basic users, the upscaling tab is just like the easiest way to play around with this. It is a very easy to use tool. You have some basic sliders that give you a lot of the flexibility and control that you want. You have all the customization that you want. But if you want to play around with the actual mechanics of this, we'll give you a little bit of a tutorial on the workflow side piece. So we've got our upscaled 3D Marshmallow King from our original to our full sized. You can see it's just a lot better, I would say. Even some of the wonkier details around the eyes and up here have gotten like fixed in the upscaling process. If we take a look at it in full size, what a beautiful little marshmallow, man. And I love his little slippers as well. There's obviously some things we fixed with Inpainting. And I think the most efficient way, again, to fix this stuff is before you upscale, get it to where you want it to be, right? Get it to be structurally how you want it to be. Fix that on the lower resolution. That will save you time and probably pain. It probably will be harder to fix those details, like structural details, in an upscaled version because you're going to be working on a smaller space. But this is obviously just like much better quality, and it's got a lot of the details that we're looking for. So let's break down this in the workflow itself. For those of you who are intimidated by nodes, close your eyes, trigger warning. The magic all happens in this new node here. So we will maybe bring down our control nets. Oops. Those are collected here. What else is relevant here? We'll talk about the new auto scale image to image node. These are the nodes that are new for this workflow, but that you can use for your own purposes. So this is the image to image auto scale node. This is going to use whatever spandrel model you give it. So spandrel is like a library that supports a bunch of different upscaling models, DJPEG models. It's basically like an all-in-one purpose image to image transformation node. It can use any of those models. This is the one that we're using right now for upscaling. And what that's going to do is it's going to upscale it. But if this is using a different model that doesn't do upscaling, it just does like image cleanup or DJPEG artifact cleanup, you can just generate that at a scale of 1. If the scale that you set to, let's say 16, you can go crazy here, is bigger than the image output, that's what the auto scale reference is, it's going to rerun this model until it gets to the right size. So if you change it to a scale of 16, it'll run this 2 times, right? It'll do 4x to get to 4, again to get to 16. And then you'll have that output. That outputs an image, it outputs the width and height. The width and height are going to be important if you're upscaling, because you're going to want to use that downstream in the workflow to instruct your noise, to instruct any type of resizing that you're doing for any part of the process. You're going to want that to be used. This is where the structure comes in. So structure is controlled here with our default structure settings. We're at a control weight of 625 and an instep of 55%. For the first phase of the control. So it's high control up until 55%. And then it lowers that down to about 0.2 for the last little bit before 85. And then it stops it at 85 and lets it finish it out with whatever details it has. Typically by that part of the denoising process, you're not going to get much structural shift or color shift. And so it's not as useful. And you want to give that kind of like freedom for a little bit more of the AI polish. When we come over to the tiled multi-diffusion denoise latence node, which is a mouthful, and maybe we'll come up with a new acronym here, is the TMDDL node, right? We are basically running the denoise latence process, and it is breaking whatever input image it comes in with the latence. It's breaking that up into a tile size that you define. And it is overlapping that based on a pixel overlap that you define. So it is going to handle all of the complexity of tile management for you in this one node. You just have a couple of new inputs to control how big of a tile you want to do, where you want those overlapped. This can be done if you're bold and have enough GPU. You can do a tile height and tile width of 2048. If you've got the VRAM, you can go big and you can do bigger tiles. Be warned, you're going to kind of like make your PC choke if you don't have the VRAM for it. You can also bring this down to 512 by 512 and use an SD 1.5 model for this process. So this is flexible. It uses both SD 1.5 and SDXL. You just want to change the tile height and size, or the tile height and width, to match the standard size that you're using for your model. This can also be increased. If you've got SD 1.5, you can do 1024 by 1024. You can do it as big as you want. The thing that will do is, if you have too high of a creativity, it's going to do the same thing that happens when you've got really big images on those models. It can do twinning and kind of duplicative, hallucinatory stuff. That's just like what you run into. Tile height and width is going to really be dictated by what is the model trained on and what can you handle. If you're doing low denoising, similar to high-res fix, you can do a larger tile with an SD 1.5 model or SDXL. It's going to kind of keep a lot of the structure because you're imposing that using the tile control net. That is more of a constraint for GPU. It's really when you get into high creativity that you want it to be better matched to the model that you're passing in. Steps, CFG scale, all that kind of stuff's normal. The denoising start, this is your creativity slider. So when we are at, let's see, what were we at? 6. This is doing a denoising start of 0.2. Where are we? 0.2, which is about a denoising strength of 80. If you're thinking about, how this would look in the standard UI. So that's kind of where the creativity comes in. Someone asked about speeding up or slowing down the render process. I haven't done any like benchmark comparisons. Typically, if you're using SD 1.5 and you're doing a larger image, it takes longer. But if you're doing a larger image, you have less tiles, and so the overall image takes a little bit less. I think there's probably a little overlap there where it would be roughly similar. It might get a little bit more inefficient. One thing that I will call out is that inside of, where is this? Inside of this process, you've got the image to latence node, which is your last node of the workflow. And that's where you take your output image and, sorry, it's the wrong node. This is image to latence. I'm looking for latence to image. But both of these have the same toggle, and you need this on both of them. Image to latence and latence to image both use the VAE model. The VAE transforms it into the latent space. and from the latent space. It is going to take that and map that back into an image. That is actually one of the higher VRAM dependent pieces. So if you have a very large tile, this is where you can kind of spike and hit out of memory if you don't do tiled VAE. What the tiled VAE process does is it breaks down similar to how tiled denoising does, and it does the VAE on each tile. You can get into some like specific requirements for the specific upscale that you're doing where you might want to tweak some of this stuff. You can change tile size, for example, and change it to larger tiles. It all, again, depends on your VRAM. And that can help with maybe like color consistency or coherence on an individual tile level. But these are all like pretty advanced needs, and we've handled a lot of that for you on the Upscale tab. It's kind of the reason for the Upscale tab is so you don't have to look at this. You can just go to the Upscaling tab and use that. Cool. I'm seeing if we've got other questions here. Someone asked, is this recorded? It is recorded. We'll have this on YouTube in probably a week or two. I think we're still catching up on a couple of studio sessions. So people called out tile sizes and kind of how that impacts things. Cool. So yeah, I think the overall takeaway here is there's a lot of so Glimmer is saying he's going to skip the line to post this one since we're releasing alongside the video and teaching people how to use it. So I think that probably makes sense. This will be released Monday. This will be out for everybody then, both on the hosted product and if you're using the community edition of the open source tool, both versions will have the upscaling tab. If you are using the hosted product, you don't really need to worry about a lot of the system requirements type conversation that we've had. It'll work for you. The one thing that I'll call out is there are some default upscaler models, but you can upload your own as well. And similarly, any models, LoRa's that you want to use for this, you can use that based on your account and how you've uploaded those into the account or shared with your team. Cool. Maybe people have got any last remaining questions before we wrap up. We got about 2 minutes left. Open the floor for any remaining questions, and then we'll just kind of move right along to the rest of our day. See some typing. Someone said, I'm so glad Invoke added this earlier, which is it's good. Unrelated question. Why are there inpainting models? Why are there inpainting models? Inpainting models are really good when you don't want creative control, like on our canvas, and you don't want to have to draw or impose the structure of what you want to transform. I would say inpainting models are really very powerful when it's a simple inpainter, like erase this area and just reimagine using my prompt. Inpainting models do that really well. So if you wanted to say put a dog there, you don't have to draw a dog first. You don't have to have anything that looks kind of like a dog, which is what a normal model would require. An inpainted model is just going to wipe that area and generate a new thing there. It's really good for simple workflows like use a text prompt to segment an area and just repaint that. So Invoke can use inpainting models, but typically if you're wanting the type of creative control that an artist would, you want to be able to dictate what do I want you to reimagine here? I'm going to draw the shape. I'm going to draw the colors. I'm going to kind of pass in that rough sketch of the thing so that you can reimagine it. That's more creative control when you've got a normal model, and inpainting just loses that. It purely depends on what the model was trained on. When using SDXL in the upscaler, is there any benefit to splitting the prompt and using only the style part? I don't think there's benefit to doing that. I think that is arguably just going to have similar results. this feature that was released with SDXL, I think is a little bit confusing to people and ultimately doesn't really do what it's advertised to do. We've thought about like changing the name of it sometimes, primarily because it's a little bit of a misnomer. But yeah, I wouldn't mess around with the SDXL prompt breaking apart. I would leave both of the text encoders getting the same prompt, focus on the style. You can include subject details if you think that there's going to be enough of that subject in each tile. Typically, you need to take out the subject if you're going really big. If you're doing something that's a little bit smaller, like a 2x, you'll typically be fine. Cool. Well, thanks everybody. It was really fun, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.